of doctor leaders, managers, making a difference, influencing policy, these are the sort of skills that must be understood. And that's why I think it's quite good that the UCAT does focus on some of these things. And so at the end of this talk, we're going to send a work experience certificate, and it will be all about math skills and financial literacy for aspiring healthcare professionals. And feel free, you can post about this on LinkedIn. You can do whatever you'd like. So to get started, let's go for a QR question that is not too tricky. So hopefully not going to scare you too much. But with this question, it's really important that we think about what sections are you reading and how we're going to do it in the context of quantitative reasoning in the UCAT. So for QR in the UCAT, what do you think is the biggest challenge? Is it the actual maths you do, or is it going to be the speed? What do you think is the bigger challenge here? The speed. So all the way through today's lesson, it's not about getting the right answer. I mean, hopefully you get that as well, but it's all about doing it in an efficient way. So not wasting time reading the wrong things, trying to minimize the number of steps you're taking. So the next question, let's keep that in mind. And I'll give you about maybe a minute or two, try and do it as quickly as possible, then we'll talk about it. And actually, just an important point, when you get the answer, do not just send it in the chat to everyone. Make sure you send it to me. So don't ruin it for everyone else. Do try and send it to me so I have an idea of where you're at. Awesome. So we've got a mix of answers here. Now, the first thing with this kind of question, even kind of taking a step back from what the answer is, the first thing that it's really important that you guys are going to be aware of is that what are we actually reading here? So start with the question. That's always the first thing that you want to read. And what actually is the question asking you? So we're vaccinating 10% of the population against TB, and we know the cost of each vaccination. So read the question first and then predict what information do we actually need. So we're going to need to know how many people are there, then how many of them are 10%, and we're going to then multiply that by £40. So the first thing we want to make sure is that we're just looking for information about how many people are there. So the population of Opal Island in 2017. Do not try and read the whole thing carefully. It's not going to help you get to the right answer, knowing about what the mortality rate is, or what the year is, or how many deaths they've been. Make sure you're just reading the relevant information. So, question first, search for what you need. That sort of thing is going to help you save time. That's the first thing for this kind of question. Second thing is making sure you know that you should be estimating as opposed to typing out these huge numbers on your calculator. Because what we're going to find is that the UCAT calculator is really inconvenient. It's not like the one that you do kind of in your maths lessons, your handheld Casio one. You have to type on the screen. It's not very good at all. Whenever you can try and estimate, and that's going to be a particularly good idea when your answer options are far apart, like you can see here, they're all, say, a factor of 10 away, like millions away from each other. You're going to try and estimate. So to start off with, we're going to take a look. It tells us the population of Opal Island as 51,805,000, so on. What you're going to see that as is just 50 million. You're not going to worry about the huge number. You're going to see that as 50 million. And we're going to think about if we're vaccinating 10%, how much is that going to be? So what's 10% of 50 million? Just put in the chat. You can share this with other people if you want. Yeah. So you've got 5 million. And if you've got 5 million people, each vaccination is 40. Well, don't even think about that 5 million to start with. Think about five. If you've got five people, each vaccination is 40. How much in total? Yeah, 200. So 5 million times 40, going to be 200 million. And so which one is the answer? Yeah, answer E. So the thing here is not being able to do the maths. The thing here is being able to do the maths faster than the other people sitting the exam. So not reading all this nonsense about mortality rate. and also not trying to type in this huge number onto your calculator. Now, it's important to take a quick glance at the answer options. If the answer options were all really, really close together and there was only like maybe a couple of digits apart, it wasn't like this, factors of 10, then maybe you're not going to estimate. So always being smart about maybe when are you estimating, when are you actually answering the question. Now, for our quantitative reasoning, like we said, mental maths where you can. You've got 26 minutes, 36 questions, about 43 seconds per question on average. Used to be 40 last year. They gave you about like a tiny bit more time per question. It doesn't mean you're going to answer every question in exactly 43 seconds. That would be ridiculous. It's like if I said the average height of a man is what, 5'9", 5'10". It doesn't mean everyone is exactly 5'10". So what you're going to do is you're going to answer some of the questions, and they might take you less than 25 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe an easier one like this. And some of them are going to require lots of steps. So they might take 60 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever you do, because you have to do, say, 4 different steps of calculation, and it's all on your calculator. The skill is being able to spot those questions, flag them. So there's a flag button on your UCAT. It's in your top right. It means you can click that button and then come back to the question at the end. It will show you which one it is. Flag those questions, come back to them. And it means, one, that you don't waste time on the harder ones because they're worth similar, same number of marks. But also, if you try and rush through one of these questions at the start, you're probably going to get it wrong. But if you leave one of these questions to do at the end and you've got some time, you finished everything else, you do it slowly, systematically, you're less likely to type something wrong in your calculator and waste time. So don't get slowed down by any questions that you predict will require multiple steps. If you don't have A-level maths, you might find some bits in QR a bit trickier, not because you require A-level maths knowledge, just because you might be a bit more out of practice. If so, I'll send a link to our website at the end of today's lesson. We've got lots of recommended topics, what comes up on UCAT, and some recommended Corbett Maths videos from GCSE. And you might want to go over these for any topics you seem to be finding tricky. And that could be a good starting point. If you are already really good with the actual math skills, you might be wanting to focus more on speed and accuracy. Now, if we'd run a summer program where we do this kind of UCAT preparation stuff, and it's exactly the same thing. We're going to try and divide up preparation into practicing math skills for accuracy, and also practicing speed, practicing technique to try and speed yourself up. So it's the same kind of practice you want to be doing on your own. And in terms of the kind of questions we know to skip to be managing our time well, that's going to be stuff like, are the answer options really close together? Are the numbers really hard to work with? So do we have, say, something like £15.64? And if you can round that to 15, then fine, it might be easy. But if you have to actually work with £15.64, that's going to take much longer. If the question has lots of words in, that might be harder. If you got lots of pieces of data in the question that you actually need to use. So it's more about the pieces of data that you're using, not just how many are there. And so trying to predict these questions is an important skill that you're going to develop with practice. Now, we're going to look at a couple more of these financial questions today. And what we're going to start with is taxes. And for any questions that are not about what's on my screen, I'll take those at the end, stay for as long as we need to. But stuff like the scoring system in QR, I'll discuss that later. So if we get started with taxes, we've got a question here. About 30 seconds to take a look. And you'd be surprised how many people think this, what I've got on the screen that Jake said. Not just aspiring medics like you guys, but actual adults with jobs. And I've heard people saying the most outrageous things, like, I don't want to get a pay rise because I'll go into a higher tax band and it'll cost me more money. Completely misinformation. So have a think about what Jake says here. And is he right? Is he wrong? So he got no messages. Is he right? Is he wrong? Yep, he's wrong. You would have done the same. Well, that's why I picked this as the very first question, because I think a lot of you would. Is anyone very brave and would like to suggest, maybe put your hand up, Why is he wrong? If not, no worries. I'll go for it. Yep, Freddie. So how does the tax system work? You were first, Freddie.
You are taxed within your bracket, so your first 12,500 doesn't get taxed, and then your 12,500 to 50,000 gets taxed at 20%, and then your extra 10,000, which you're getting at 60,000 a year, is taxed at 40%.
Exactly, perfect. So he is wrong. Does that make sense for people, what Freddie just said? So what we're saying is that if someone is earning £60,000, we want to see how much money goes into each bracket. So make sure you have read the question, by the way. Nicola making £60,000. If someone is making £60,000, we need to figure out how much money is in each bracket, starting from the lowest bracket and filling that up until we get to the top, then filling the next bracket, see how much money is in there, then filling the third bracket, seeing how much money in there, going upwards, so starting from the lowest bracket and going up until you fill each bracket and until you're sorted with all of the money. So I've given you a slightly visual way of looking at this. Let's change bracket into bucket. We've got three buckets here. And if this person, Nicola, is making £60,000, then we want to start off with the first bracket. So if we start with the first bracket, we've got the first 12,500 she pays no tax on. So out of the 60,000, we can put the first 12,500 into this 0% bucket. And the 0% bucket is now full of money all the way up to 12,500. And yet, we've not yet put all of our money into buckets. So the first 12,500 is now out the way. Let's try the next bucket. So we will now fill the remainder of money into the 20% bracket and we'll go up to 50,000. And remember, we said to start with that Nicola had 60,000. So how much is left over that we now need to put into the third bucket? And we can share this either to me, share this into the chat. So some people are saying 47,500. Remember, we're talking about both. So we put the first 12,500 into the 0% bucket. Then we put the rest of the money that could fit into the next bucket. So remember, this allows you to put all the money from 12,500 up to 50,000. So in this bucket, we're going to be putting the next 37,500. So the first 12,500 went into the 0% bucket. The next 37,500 up to 50K went into the 20% bucket. And that means to get up to 60,000, we've got 10,000 left. And so this bucket here that goes up to 150, it's not totally full, but we're going to fill this in and let's fill it in with this yellow money here. We're going to fill it in all the way up to 60,000. So does that make sense how I've divided my money between the tax brackets, starting from the bottom one? Yeah? Okay, well, now let's see how we're going to work it out. Well, in the 0% bucket, we have to pay 0% tax on all the money in there. So what is 0% of 12,500? Zero? Yeah, nice and easy. For the next bracket, we need to work out 20% of how much money is in this bucket. And so what did we say? How are we going to figure out how much money is in this bucket? So if this bucket, we start filling it up by 12,500 and we go up to 50, how much is in that bucket? Yeah, 50 minus 12,500. So in this bucket, we have room for 50,000 minus 12,500, which is 37,500. Now, we need to work out 20% of this. So either you can do that on your calculator, or you can think about it logically. Well, 10% is going to be 3,750. And to work out 20%, you can then double it. So you've got 6,000 and you've got 750 doubled, which is 1,500. So total 7,500. So in this bucket, we got 20% of 3,750, which is going to be £7,500 in the second tax bracket. And in the third tax bracket, we said we've got £10,000. And how much tax are we paying in that? So in the third bracket, what did the question tell you? How much tax in the third bracket? What percentage? Yeah, 40%. So we've got 40% of the next 10,000, which is going to be 4,000. I would hope we don't use a calculator for that, even if we did for the last one. So if we've got £0 in the first bucket, we've got 7,500 in the next bucket, and we've got 10% of 10,000, 40% of 10,000, or £4,000 in the last bucket. How much have we got altogether? How much tax are we paying altogether? Yep, 11,500. Everyone happy with what to do here? Yeah, these tax questions apparently are meant to be tricky. Apparently, a lot of people who Ruby asked before today didn't want to take this session because they found these tax questions tricky, like some of the tutors. But from what I can see, there's not really any difficult maths involved here, and it's actually not that long either. So I wouldn't flag this question. If you know how to do it now, and I hope that everyone does, I wouldn't necessarily flag this question. Because the actual calculations you did, there were only two steps. You had to do 40% of 10,000 and you had to do 20% of 37,500. Don't skip this one. Do you do that in 30 seconds? With practice, honestly, you potentially could. Remember, you've got an average of 43, so you can take up to maybe a minute on this one if you do some of the easier ones like the last one in 30. So even if you took about a minute on this, that would be okay. If you think you're going to take more than a minute, maybe skip and come back to it. But you should. Right. Now we're going to have a think about the UCAT calculator, and we're going to think about it in the context of compound and simple interest. We're also going to think about it in the context of tax questions. So lots of different things we're going to think about in the context of this UCAT calculator. Now, for this UCAT calculator, the very first thing you need to know is that it's a good idea to be practicing your keyboard shortcuts. So if you've got a calculator like this at school that has your top row, that has a number pad, and that has these buttons next to your number pad, when I say these buttons, I'm referring to these ones. That is really good to practice with because that's what you're going to get in the real exam, and it is faster. Now, what do we think these buttons mean? What's this squashed fly? What's the dash sign? What do they stand for? Yeah, divide and multiply. So practice using those. If you're practicing with your keyboard at home on a laptop and you don't have a keyboard like this, then just practice using shift in these ones. But if you can use one like the one you get in the UCAT, that's obviously going to be really useful. So this is also for multiply, shift and 8. This is also for divide, shift and question mark. Now, the other things that you need to know about are your m plus m minus MRC function. So do we know anything about m plus m minus MRC function? M plus m minus MRC. And the keyboard shortcuts for them are P for m plus, M for m minus, C for MRC. Yep, they're all about memory. So we can think about why we might want to use these different functions. So why we might want to use m plus m minus MRC with an example. So say we've got 14 divided by 15 plus 16 divided by 17. These are our fractions. Why do we not just, so if I was to just go on here, 14 divided by 15 plus 16 divided by 17, why is that totally wrong? And I know someone said there are people in the waiting room. Don't worry, I let them in. Yeah, because this calculator is a bit rubbish. It doesn't follow BidMass. It doesn't follow the order that you put calculations in, and there's no way to use brackets. So what you could do instead, well, one option is to do 14 divided by 15, write it down, okay, 0.933, and then you could do 16 divided by 17, and you could add it on. But if you were doing maybe multiple steps, so you didn't want to write it down, then one thing that you could do is you could use your memory function. So what these M plus M minus MRC do is you effectively have a little memory box that sits next to your calculator. And whatever you add to your memory, it is added to that memory box. So if we have, for example, the number 9 on the screen, and I press M plus, what is going to happen is the 9 has now been M plus, it has now been added to your memory. So if this is your memory, you now have added 9 to the memory. If I was to then go 5 and M plus, what do I end up with in my memory altogether? So I had 9 M plus, I added 9. I went 5 M plus, I added 5. What's in my memory right now? Yeah, 14. So if you press the MRC button, that's going to bring back what is in your memory. So if I press the letter C, that's the keyboard shortcut, or the MRC button, that's going to bring back number 14. Let's try that then with this question here. And M minus just does the opposite. So M plus adds whatever's in your screen to the memory box. M minus takes it away. So if I was to do 9M minus, what's going to be in my memory? Now that it's clear. Yeah, minus 9. Everyone happy? Make sense? Cool. So now if we try the same thing with this calculation here, well, what you could do if you wanted to is you could do 14 divided by 15, add that to the memory by pressing the letter P. Then you could do 16 divided by 17, and then you could add memory. So you could press plus, and then you could press MRC. So add the memory to that, and you end up with 1.87. So memory is a bit like if you think about on your calculator that you use at school, your ans button. It's a little bit like that. But you can add and subtract stuff from your ans button. So is everyone happy with what I just did there? MRC brought back what was in my memory. So we can try that again. If we're trying to do this calculation here, 14 divided by 15 plus 16 divided by 17, well, what we could do is 14 divided by 15, then add that to memory by pressing M plus. Then we could do 16 divided by 17. And then we could add on what's in our memory to this number here. So we could do plus, let's press the plus button, and then we could use MRC. And what's MRC going to do? Well, it's going to bring back the thing that I just put in memory. So plus MRC, MRC brought back 0.9333. That was my 14 divided by 15. Now I've added them together. That is my answer. Does that make sense? M plus adds what's on my screen to the memory. M minus takes it away. So if I wanted to subtract what's on my screen from the memory, like say I had the number 20 and I press M minus, well, now my memory contains minus 20. And MRC is just going to show me what's in my memory. If I press MRC twice, it's just going to clear the memory. So MRC, remember, is the letter C on your keyboard. Press MRC twice, that little M in the corner goes away. So that little M you see there is going to go away. Now my memory is 0. Yeah, M plus just means add to number in the memory. What's the purpose of M minus? Or what if you want to take something away from the memory? Like what if you wanted to do 14 over 15, subtract 16 over 17? Well, then you would use M minus to take 16 over 17 away from the memory. And yes, A, you are correct. You can just put minus 20 then M plus. That is the same thing. So yeah, what you're saying is right. Now, why do we think... No, Nashita, the memory box is not actually visible. I just drew it to explain. Unfortunately not. Now, let's think about that in the context of tax questions, because today was all about money. Why would we use this memory thing potentially if we're doing a tax question? Why might we do memory if there's a tax question? So we talked about the buckets, right? In real life, we're not going to draw any buckets. Yeah, we're just going to store the previous bucket. So imagine we got this question here, and it's about what is the tax that you pay on an income of 28,950. And imagine you were using your calculator. Well, you're going to work out how much money is in the first bracket and pay 10% on that. So 8950 times 0.1 or divided by 10. Obviously, you can do it in your head, but assuming we were using the calculator, you could then add that to memory. That's your first number. So the money in the first tax bracket, you've now added to your memory. We then work out how much tax in the next bracket. So how much money is now in the next tax bracket? If Bill has an income of 28,950. So we said there was 8,950 in the first bracket. How much in the next one? Yeah, 20,000. So we could then do 20,000 times 0.15, 15%. Add that to the memory as well. Well, now we've added both tax brackets to our memory. If we bring it up on the screen, you can see it's got the answer, both of them added together, 389. And really quickly, why did I pick 20,000? Because remember, we filled these up by bucket. So the first bucket, we filled in 8,950 of built income. Now, if we've used up 8,950, we've got 20,000 left over. That's going to go into the 15% tax bracket. Hope that makes sense. One, how taxes work. Two, how we can use M plus M minus MRC for tax questions, also for other kinds of questions. Now we've got another maths question, and people asking how long is this lesson? I'll give you a choice. Do you want to do slightly more questions and finish at 7, or do you want to do slightly fewer questions? Sorry, other way around. Slightly fewer questions and finish at 7, or slightly more and finish at half 7? Okay, most people saying more. The people who want to leave at 7, absolutely feel free. No pressure. And if you want to stay for more, I'll continue till half 7. I mean, if it was me and someone was teaching for free, when this stuff mostly costs money, I probably want to stick around for longer. But up to you guys. So we've got another one here, and this is all about compound and simple interest. So firstly, remember the technique I said. Start by reading the question, see what stuff is relevant here. So what actually is the question that we need to read? Yeah, I'll post the recording. Let's post the recording. Which bit is the question here? Yeah, it's usually the bottom sentence for any question like this. It's going to be the closest sentence to the answer options. So the question here is after 3 years, how much interest will she earn on her 2,000 savings deposit? Okay. When you see a question about interest, you know what are the numbers you need. So don't start reading this waffle. Instead, predict what you need. So what am I going to need? Well, I need to know how many years. I need to know whether it's simple or compound interest. I need to know how much money is in the bank account, and I need to know what the interest rate is. So some of that's already been given to you in the question. We know it's 3 years. We know it's $2,000. We also need to know, is it simple or is it compound? We also need to know, what else did I say? We need to know what the interest rate is. So if we look at this section now with the information, where are we told what is the interest? Is it simple or compound? And no, unfortunately, this is not halal. This comes under riba, but I think answering questions about it is not necessarily problematic. It's good to know what, even if you are opposed to it, it's good to know what it's about. So the question already tells you here, it talks about 5% simple interest per year. So we've got what the rate is, we've got what kind of interest it is. Now, don't read any of this other nonsense about whether she studies marine biology or how much money she has or any of this stuff. Now, knowing that it's 3 years, $2,000, before we go any further, let's start by thinking about what's the difference between simple and compound interest. So, what do we know? So, in one sentence, how would you explain to maybe your 5-year-old brother What is the difference between simple and compound? Yeah, some nice answers. We have someone who just joined who is called Ash Ketchum. I'm not sure if that's a real name. Interesting. So we have simple and compound interest, and we've got 2003 years. When you have simple interest, you're only earning interest on the amount of money you put in to start with. So if we were earning 5% on the 2000 we put in to start with, then what is 5% of 2000? Yes, 100. So 10%, half it. So if we're doing simple interest, then it's £100 every year in interest. So after the first year, you're going to have 2,100. At the end of the second year, you're going to have 2,200. And so at the end of the third year, what do you have? So you got £300 in interest, and how much do you have in your account? 2,300. So the question could ask about either, just look at the answer options. And well, this one is asking how much interest, so the answer is 300. Not all the interest questions will be like this. Now, simple interest questions are going to be simple. They're just ones that you do in your head. So you just work out what is the 5%, add that on by however many years. So if in 1 year 5% is 100, it's just 100 times 3. In 3 years, 300. If it's compound interest question, it's not as simple. You're going to need to use your calculator. Compound interest means you get interest on the actual interest as well. So in the first year, you start off with 2000. In the first year, you get 3%. It's exactly the same. So at the end of the first year, you do end up with the same 2100. But in the end of the second year, you're now applying your 5% not to the 2001 at the start, but to the 2100 you began with. So at the end of the second year, you're going to end up with 2100 times 1.05. And so in the end of year two, you're actually going to end up with £2,205. Because what we've done is 1.05 times 2100. That's for the end of the second year. Does that make sense? What compound interest is, how it's different? Yeah. So every year you have an additional year of compound interest, you multiply by 1.05. So in the first year, you're going to end up with 2000 times 1.05. In the next year, it's going to be 1.05 times 1.05. In the next year, so on. You could, if you were doing this on your normal calculator, just do 1.05 to the power of however many years. So if it was 5 years, you do 1.05 to the power of 5. Unfortunately, the UCAT calculator doesn't have powers. So either you could do 2000 times 1.05 and type it out over and over, like that. Or the alternative option is to add your 1.05 to memory. So 1.05 m plus. Now in my memory, I've got 1.05. And then I can just really quickly do 2000 times C over and over. Because remember, C is the interest rate. And that, if you're good with your calculator, is a faster way of typing. But that is only for the compound interest questions. So on your calculator, either write out 1.05 or 1.05 m plus times by C over and over. So 1C for every year. I don't think you can press equals again. Let's check. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be working. So when you press equals again, it seems to be that's clearly not the right answer. I think it's timesing 2000 by itself. So don't press equals again. But if it was your calculator that you use at school, then yeah, you would just press equals again. Right, let's go on to next one. Less about the calculator, more about some mental maths. Let's try and do this as fast as possible. And remember sending the answer to me as opposed to ruining it for others. Nice. I like that the two fastest people to answer it did get it wrong. And there's a reason why. It does say trick question at the top. And that is why I encouraged you to rush through it. So just to highlight that this is a very common thing that can go wrong. So everyone happy for me to go over it now? You had a chance to read? Ready to go over it? I mean, no one has said no, so I'm going to assume yes. So, with this kind of question, I'm sure everyone can do the maths. The big thing here in terms of what can go wrong. So, remember, I just told you the technique, which is read the question, only read the essential information. Now, that does mean reading the question itself very, very carefully. So, if we read this question here, right, and if we ignored all of this, when we're reading it, we have to be really careful that we've not missed anything. So the 450 is important, the single-sided color is important, and okay, well, you can go in this table, um, and then you can go to 450, so 200 to 599, and you can go to single-sided color, and you can say, well, 450 into 60p. Yes, but don't just do that, okay? So if you're just reading the question and not reading the whole data table, at least read the question very carefully. And well, what you can see here in the question is that it mentioned including VAT. So that would be a very important hint that you should go back and check in the question, in the stem, does it tell you anything about VAT? And so you'd quickly scan the stem and you'd see that this is written up here. VAT is charged at 20%. So you don't have to read all the information, like the first sentence, fine, doesn't matter. But this sentence would be relevant. And you know that you have to look for a sentence about VAT because the question mentions VAT. So that's the first thing. If you're rushing through it, if you're just reading the question, that's okay. But at least read the question very, very carefully. So remember, you have to include VAT. This calculation would also have to be times 1.2 for the 20% VAT. Alternative option is this is very, very common that in the UCAT they try and trick you. And I used to, when I was starting my practice, always fall for this kind of thing because I tried to do them really, really quickly and not read everything. So, what they always try to trick you with is small things like this, like VAT is added at an extra 20%. Or you've got kids going to a theme park and it says kids go free. Or it might be that the price is double on every second Saturday, something like that. That information is usually just under the table or just on top of the table. So if you want to check you're not being caught out, and imagine you've got a really long question, it's got like 5 different data tables. Well, what you might want to do is the data table that you're using, the sentence right above it and the sentence right below it, that's usually where they hide these kind of traps. So if you're not reading everything, what might be a good idea? Just read right on top of the table, just read right under the table. That's where they're going to hide traps like this. Other thing that I think is pretty nice to know for a question like this, you can interchange between fractions, multiple decimals, as much as you want. So if we have to do 450 times 60p, maybe that's not something you do in your head. Well, whenever you have something like this, that's a nice round number of pence, you could equally see that as a fraction of a pound. So rather than doing that calculation as 450 times 60p, you could do that 450 times 3/5 of a pound. And well, we know that 60p is 0.60. Well, 0.60 is 3/5. And when you're using fractions, they're usually nicer to work with mental maths because 450 times 3/5, well, you can divide by 5 first. 450 by 5 is going to be 90. 93s are 270 comp. So that would be quite nice. Instead of using your calculator, 450 times 60p, and then having to convert back to pounds, given that the question is already asking you about pounds, you might want to convert to pounds first, and you might want to use a fraction. So rather than 450 times 60p, see that as 450 times 3/5 of a pound. 1/5 is 90, 3/5 are 270. Now remember that the answer is not C270 because you have to add on VAT. Now, if I have to do 270 times 1.2, well, I know the answer can't be A or B as it has to be bigger. I know the answer can't be C as it has to be bigger. And realistically, out of D and E, which one looks like it's about 20% bigger? So if we think about 270, well, that's about 300. We're adding on another 20%, about 60 more. We want an answer that's about 300 and something, 330. So out of D and E, which one is closer to about 20% bigger than 270 without even doing the multiplication? Yeah, D. So does that make sense? If we want to work out 1.2 times 270, and these are our answer options, well, it's obviously not going to be 432. That's almost double. It's going to be something that's a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger. And it's about, say, 20% of 300, which is 60. So about 60 bigger, 50, 60 bigger. Only D is right. You don't actually need to work anything out that 20% is 54 and add on 54. So are you happy with everything I've said here in terms of working back from answer options, in terms of looking for common traps, and in terms of using fractions? Cool. Next question. Let's check the time. We got some time. Profit margin. These equations are going to be really important for different sorts of questions, and it's good to know what they mean. So, what do I mean by profit? What is a profit? Money gained. So then what's the difference between a revenue and a profit? Yeah, so you're going to subtract the cost. So revenue is just how much you make. So for example, if I was selling books and I sell each book for £5 and I sell 10 books, so my revenue is going to be £50. But I also have to think about how much those books actually cost me to buy. And if I bought those books for £4 each and I sold them for £5 and I sell 10 of them, well, I've only actually made a profit of £10 because I spent 40 of the £50 to buy the books in the first place. So profit is going to be revenue, take away your expenses. And so lots of people have this already. Take away costs or take away expenses. Profit is how much you're left over with. Revenue is how much you take. So if you're selling books and you're selling 10 for £5, you take in 50, but profit is how much you get to keep. What then might be a profit margin? That is takeaway. So for profit, we're doing takeaway. What is a profit margin? And it's a percentage. That gives you a hint. What do we need to do with percentages? Okay, so it's not profit over cost. That is a different financial metric. That would be return on investment, but I don't think you see that ever on the UCAT. What profit margin is going to be, so not profit over expenses or costs, but profit over revenue. So profit margin is going to be profit over revenue. So if we go back to the book example, well, I'm buying the books for £4. I'm selling the books for £5. That means I make £1 profit on each one. And my revenue is going to be 5. My profit is going to be 1. What is the profit margin? Which two numbers do I have to divide? 1 by 5. So my profit margin is 20%. So that's not profit divided by cost. That's profit margin, as in, like, what is the margin? What do I get to keep? What is the margin between what I spend and what I sell it for? That is my profit margin. It is 20% because 80% went on buying the stuff. So profit is going to be revenue minus cost, and profit margin is going to be profit divided by revenue. And obviously, if it's a percentage, you can multiply by 100. Now, on your UCAT calculator, I really hope no one wastes time to multiply by 100. If you saw, for example, that something said 0.8, well, you know that's 80%. So are we happy with what these words mean? Don't waste any time in the exam trying to figure it out. So are we happy with what they mean? No. Which one do we not understand? Profit margin. So profit margin, remember I gave the hypothetical scenario. I'm buying and selling books. I buy them for £9. I sell them for £10. Well, how much I sell them for, that's my revenue. How much I buy them for, that's my cost. How much I make at the end, that's my profit. Profit margin is just profit divided by revenue. So if I'm getting a profit of £1 and I'm selling them for £10, well, my profit margin is £1 divided by £10 or 10%. Great. Let's move on to another question. So for this question, what we're going to look at is how we can estimate without actually working out any of the maths here. So the way that we're going to estimate for a question like this without working out any of the numbers is by using this technique of comparing two against each other. So that probably will make more sense with the example. Question is asking, based on the numbers in this graph, what is the greatest profit the company made in a year? Well, how are we going to work out the profit? Nicole, yes, I could do 10 by 50, but that's the same as 1 by 5. They're just multiple. Misha, you know it shows your name. Please don't draw on the screen. So what do we have to subtract? No drawing on the screen. I will disable that for everyone. Yep, revenue minus cost. So two ways of going about this. One is obviously by subtracting each of these revenue numbers by cost numbers. Valid approach. But the way to go about this the fastest would be to pick one and start comparing it to the others. So if we think about year one and we compare it to year two, well, we can see that year one versus year two is higher than year one by 5, but year two, the costs are only higher by 2. So it's quite obvious from looking at it that year two is going to be higher than year one. So we can rule out year one. Now, if we compare year two and year three, well, year three is definitely going to be higher than year two because look at how much more revenue we have and only a tiny bit more cost. So we can rule out year two. Now, if we compare year three and year four, well, we can see in year three versus year four, the revenue goes up by all this much, 15, but the costs, they only go up by 2. So again, year four is going to be bigger than year three. Well, we know 2 is bigger than 1, 3 is bigger than 2, 4 is bigger than 3. And now if we compare 4 and 5, well, between 4 and 5, for this one, the revenue is 20 higher, but for this one, the cost is only 5 higher. So if you look at kind of comparing these two, 4 has a way bigger revenue than 5, and it has kind of less costs. Now, looking at these two comparing against each other, 4 is clearly higher than 5, and so we would only be actually working out year 4. 125 minus 45, which is 80. Answer B. So does that make sense, my point here, how we actually can just look at these and visually by inspecting say that, okay, well, year 2 is actually better than year 1, year 3 is actually better than year 2. And I went all of them to make an example. In reality, if you were doing the exam, there is no way you would need to work out all of them to see that 4 is bigger than 1 and 2, right? You can just see that visually. Well, this is so much bigger. Are they drawn to scale? Well, hopefully they will be drawn to scale. But even if they're not, like we've got these numbers on the axis, right? Nasra, are you adding the revenue and the cost, or do you ignore the minus sign? Well, in this case, you're adding them because they've already shown it with a minus sign. Because you can't exactly have a negative cost. What they mean by the minus sign is just they've already put the minus in front of it. So in this case, you would add them. But if it had just given the cost without a minus sign, then you would, well, subtract them. Just think about it logically for some of these questions. So don't blindly follow a formula. Like I know this formula said revenue minus expenses, but do think about it logically. If they put a minus in front of the 50 already, that means that it costs £50. It does tell you that actually in the question as well. So cost is expressed as a negative value. And so in this case, yeah, you'd add them. You're not going to do 105 minus 50, but usually it might not have the minus in front. So do make sure you're thinking about it logically as well. Answer here is B. Cool. Let's try another one. Little bit trickier. So I'll let you guys give this a go. And I think what's tricky here is not actually getting the answer. I think it's making sure you're doing it in an efficient way that minimizes the number of kind of how big your numbers get. So try and solve this question. But what I'm expecting from you is try and keep the numbers as small as possible. Don't try and get your numbers into the hundreds. Keep them small. Think about how you might do that. And so I'll let you try on your own first. We've got a cost price of £62 here and £64 here, if you can't see. So that says pound 62, that says 60. Give this a try. Direct message me the answer. And a lot of people are saying that they might feel like they need to leave at 7. In that case, what we might do is, well, we started, I think, at about 10 past. So I will just finish any teaching at 10 past 7 and maybe stick around to answer questions. As I see a couple people have left, and it might be unfair if we run too much without them. So I'll stick around to answer some questions, but after this one, I think we'll finish at 10 past 7, as a few people have asked. And I guess if I think about it logically, I know from my perspective, it's like, well, usually you'd have to pay for this and you should stick around for longer. But I mean, if I think about, say, at uni, if one of the lecturers and they made us stay in the evening for an extra hour or two, I don't think we would be happy. So I get your perspective. We'll finish at 10 past. So how do we do this question, right? Let's talk about how we do it first, and then maybe about how we're making sure we're doing it in the most efficient way. So first, let's just talk about what the question says in terms of the most straightforward approach you might want to take. So Hubert bought a dozen jackets. How many jackets is a dozen? 12. So Hubert bought 12 jackets in January. He bought 12 jackets in February. And he sold them at $99 each. Well, that's an immediate red flag, as in something you might need to worry about, because the answers are all in pounds and the cost price is all in pounds. So if he sold them at $99 each, it might be a good idea just to start with by converting this into pounds. Well, we know that £1 is $1.50. So if we've got $99 and we want to exchange that into a number of pounds, we could divide by 1.5 because $1 is so £1 is $1.50. $99 is going to be divided by 1.5, that many pounds. Now, what did I say about fractions? Maybe keep that in mind to help you with your mental maths. Well, 1.5 is going to be 3 over 2. When we divide by 3 over 2, that is the same thing as multiplying by 2 over 3. If we multiply 2/3 of 99, well, 1/3 is going to be 33, and 2/3 are going to be 66. So $99 is exactly the same as 66 pounds. Now, if we've got these jackets being sold for 66 pounds, we know that is going to represent the sale price or what the revenue is going to become. We also need to think about, well, what's the amount that he's actually buying them for? Because if we know how much he's buying them for and we know how much he's selling them for, that will be how we figure out the profit. So he's selling them for 66 pounds. He's buying them. Well, we can look at the graph. In January, how much is he buying them for? £62. So in January, he buys 12 at 62. And in February, how much is he buying them for? £64. So at this point, there are two routes that you can take. We have all of the important information now to answer the question. We know that he buys 12 in January at 62. He buys 12 in February at 64. He sells them all at 66. 24 jackets sold at 66. Now, if you want to do this the calculator way, or kind of the way that we just looked at the equation, well, we know that profit is going to be revenue, which is how much he makes, 24 times 66, take away the cost. So revenue, how much he makes, is going to be 24 times 66. The costs are going to be 62 times 12. These are the 12 he buys in January. Add on the 12 he buys in February. 64 times 12. And that would give you the right answer. If you were doing that on your Casio calculator at school, fair enough. So people happy with what we've done here? Profit is revenue takeaway cost. Okay? Don't want to be doing this. Very big numbers. 24 times 66, I don't think I could do that in my head very easily. Definitely not that quickly. But really no need to get there to answer this question. Instead, you want to try and keep your numbers as small as possible, and you want to think about how you can do this via mental maths. Well, in January, he's bought 12 jackets at 62, and he's selling them at 66. So his January jackets, how much is he making on each one? Four extra? Okay, well, if you're making four extra on each jacket and you're selling 12 jackets, that's four 12s. That's 48. On his February jackets, how much is he making on each one? Two extra. So two 12s are 24. Now, do we even need to add these numbers? Well, not really, because you can just look at the last digit. Well, 8 plus 4 is 12. The last digit has to be a 2. Only one of these answer options end in a 2. So it's D. We don't even need to add the 2 in the 4. So that is a better option. Keep your numbers small. You're selling 12 jackets at £4 profit each, 12 jackets at £2 profit each, and so 12 fours are 48, 12 twos are 24, altogether makes 72. Another way you could do this, which is basically the same, but just a different way of looking at it. Well, if you have 12 at, and if this doesn't make sense to people, don't worry. Everything that I just said before is totally fine to get you the answer. If you have 12 of them at 62 and you have 12 of them at 64, well, what's the average going to be? What's the average price? Yeah, it's going to be 63 for the person who said. So if you got 12 at 62, 12 at 64, well, on average, you're paying 63 for each one. So on average, you're making £3 on each one, and you're selling 24 of them. Well, 24 times 3 is 72. That could also be a way of seeing it. That's probably what I would have spotted. But if you didn't spot that, then totally fine. Just do 4 times 12, add 2 times 12. But you could see that on average, you're getting them for 63 each. Well, because 12 at this, 12 at this, halfway between, and you're making £3 on each one. So 3 times 24. Cool. Let's see. So I think we've got to the hour. I will leave that there for your new questions for today. And thank you so much, guys, for coming and listening. I have recently found out that you are somewhat fortunate. It seems like I had my Zoom settings on the wrong thing, and you more than 100 people were not able to join. That's why it capped at 100. So good that you guys got to stay. I think some people got locked out. And what else? What else would I like to tell you? I run a group chat where you guys can ask questions. We run Q&As. We share WhatsApp questions. That's totally free to join. How you want to join that is using the link ucat.me. And if you use the link ucat.me, you can find our WhatsApp advice group. You can join that. There are already lots of people there. You can join with this link. Also, if you keep an eye on this, it also says lots of free resources here. You click here, you've got loads of free things that will help you with your medical application, oncology work experience, supercurriculars, application process, VR, QR, SJT, DM, everything. Interviews, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, KCL, all with loads of our students who got into those unis last year. And we ran this free event. This is all recorded. So, and all of this stuff you can find by ucat.me. So, loads of things you need to help you with your medical application. We've got these guides. They talk about how each medical school selects their applicants. So, like, what does the shortlisting process look like? Where can you apply with different predicted grades? What is the UCAT cutoff at each place? All this kind of stuff. Strategic applications. Everything you can find, you can tell your friends just the code ucat.me. Very nice and simple. All available there. So the kind of things you might need. And some people are asking about tuition. So this is like a widening access event. So I probably don't want to push any paid stuff here, but we do run a summer program. We do offer tutoring, and you can probably find out about that by reaching to me directly.